Okay, right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the scrutiny meeting. Apologies for the slight delay. There was a fire alarm test going on, so that's why we haven't gone live until just now. So yes, welcome. We're talking workforce, police face action plan and neurodiversity today. If we do introductions, I'm Emily Spurrell. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner. Jeannie.
Hello, I'm Jeannie Bell. I'm the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
I'm Bisi Osundi Kaur, Independent Scrutiny Advisor. Good morning, everyone.
Morning all, Sue McTaggart, Chief Executive of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Morning, John Riley, Chief Finance Officer for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Morning, Kim Dawson, Scrutiny and Improvement Officer at the OPCC.
Keisha Reddy, observing from the OPCC.
Serena Kerr, Chief Constable.
Good morning, Chris Green, Deputy Chief Constable.
Good morning, Assistant Chief Constable Jenny Sims, People Services.
Good morning, Jonathan Davis, Chief Superintendent Merseyside Police, Matrix and Force Ops.
Morning everyone, John Roy, ACC for Local Policing, Prevention and Criminal Justice.
Good morning everybody, Mark Cameen, ACC for Investigations and Intelligence.
Good morning, Shirley Jones from Corporate Support and Development.
Morning everyone, Chief Inspector Rob Budden, working in People Services on the Police Face Action Plan.
Good morning, Superintendent Nick Gunnar-Tilliker, Criminal Justice Department.
Good morning, Keith Dickinson, Director of Resources, Merseyside Police.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've got apologies from Chris Shaw, who is one of our independent scrutiny advisors because he's unwell, and also apologies from Paul White. Okay, so we move on then. So the action tracker from the previous meeting, I think there was one action around the data wash that was being done. I think we were expecting a full update until March, but I don't know, Chris, did you want to give a brief update on where that's up to?
Yeah, so the work remains ongoing and at pace as you'd expect, and as we previously updated, we'll bring a full update back in March. But yeah, the forces are complying with all of the statutory regulations in relation to that data wash and the information back into the centre.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, if we move on now then to the dashboard. So for those who might not have seen the dashboard before, this is the template that we bring back to each meeting that just gives us a snapshot of what the crime patterns have been in the last quarter, just to see if there's anything to flag, either positive or negative. Shirley, or are you going to start with this, or Chief? Are you?
No, I'll take us through the exceptions, and then Shirley will support moving on from there. So just in relation to what it'll just be by exceptions on the dashboard. So in relation to calls and response, the 101 non-emergency call performance has experienced a reduction compared to last year. The work is currently being progressed to assess, and additionally there's work being completed nationally on the alignment now of SLAs, identifying that there are probably 4 different categories across the country, and we're trying to seek some consistency because that's probably confusing to our communities. In relation to crime, we continue to experience decreases in crime. So the latest period include decreases in domestic abuse, rape, hate crime, serious violence, burglary, vehicle crime and drug-related crime. We've also seen significant decreases in firearms discharges and homicides. In relation to the solved outcomes, so based on the period of assessment which we're covering at this scrutiny meeting, that being up to June 23, we've experienced some positive improvements in our solved outcomes compared to last year, and that's around domestic abuse, other sexual offences, violence against the person and theft from person. In relation to complaints, the Schedule 3 complaints have experienced a reduction and the non-Schedule 3 a small increase. In relation to victim satisfaction, there's been a small reduction in victim satisfaction, and in relation to stop search, there's been an 11% reduction in volume compared to the same period in the previous year. So in relation to exceptions, that's all there is for this quarter.
So in terms of obviously the 101, as you highlighted, there has been a reduction in terms of the time taken, but we did discuss that in quite a lot of detail at the previous meeting. So I think we'll probably come back to that in the future because it's obviously one that you're continuing to monitor. Just in terms of an update though, you did say at the last meeting that there was going to be work to recruit new members of staff to help increase capacity in the call centre. Has that taken place, or where's that up to?
Yeah, so work ongoing in terms of recruiting. So we've got a series of recruitment campaigns on running to increase. And we've got further business cases coming back into our Chief Officer monthly meeting next week, where we'll take further decisions in terms of further increases into the establishment there, balanced against other demands across the organisation. So yeah, recruitment ongoing to fill the existing vacancies and then increase to deal with the ongoing performance challenges around 101 and call handling per se.
Okay, great, thank you. And then there was a couple of other, so you've highlighted the firearms discharges, and obviously that's decreased, which is very welcome. Do we have any sense as to why that's reduced, and any comment on some of the activity that's been going on? Mark?
Yes, Commissioner. We did speak about this at the last meeting also, and it's fantastic to see, as you've highlighted, a continuation of those reductions. You'll see from some of the notes that at the end of August we recorded 12 firearms discharges for the calendar year. That is expected to be at 39 based on previous year's performance, and also we recorded 8 firearms discharges this financial year against 28 the previous year. And I mentioned previously that those previous years were of course very competitive in their own right. We have looked at a number of ways in which how we assess why those changes to our numbers have come about and those significant reductions, and obviously very cognizant of all the events of last August as well, and the backdrop of that. We have come to the conclusions following 2 studies now. We've asked the North West Regional Organised Crime Unit to look at our numbers, and also our firearms analyst to do a deep dive into the last 23 years of firearms discharge figures across Merseyside. The conclusions of that are that the large impacts have been around the implementation of the firearms investigation team, a dedicated team to look at, target and investigate all discharges and linked series weapons that are being used on Merseyside, a strengthening of the governance process across Merseyside and a one-team approach, the quality of those investigations and working with the North West ROCU, which has enabled us to remove high-profile nominals who we know have capacity and capability using firearms, the fantastic work around clear hole build that the force has been engaged on, which is again added to the removal of a number of key nominals. Operation Venetic has had another impact there, and we know that I've talked about that before, about having probably one of the biggest impacts on serious and organised crime that policing has ever seen. So that continues to yield benefits for us in taking out high-profile individuals who are firearms nominals as well. Strong media updates throughout the last 12 months has also seen good support from communities. We've had a number of gun surrenders that have been successful as well, and a number of covert operations. So a combination of all of those factors as a result of those 2 studies have highlighted that they are the key areas which are seeing the successes around reduction in firearms discharges.
Great, thank you. Jeannie, do you want to ask?
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask a brief question on ASB, because it's gone up slightly, and it's one of the things that the public raise probably most often with us because it's so visible. So, you know, I'm just, what are your thoughts around the increase in recorded ASB incidents? Do you think there's a particular reason for that? Is it seasonal? Is it, you know, out of the blue?
Thank you. I think we did see a rise in May and June in particular, which has impacted the overall figures. In part seasonal, so we have some pretty effective summer plans in place. The hot weather came a little bit earlier this year, and we saw that at least contribute to a spike in ASB. I think, as you'd expect, we had a robust and rapid response to that and a really effective summer plan. So we've seen that fall and drop beneath previous years over the summer period, and I'm confident our response will continue to impact communities. And, you know, delighted to start to see the first cohort of the sort of commissioner-led interventions and community reparation interventions taking place over the last couple of weeks as well. So a lot of range of measures in place to impact that, bring that down and respond effectively to community concerns.
Bissy, did you want to ask your questions?
Please. All right, thank you very much. I'm aware that there seems to be a lot of information presented on the dashboard, but I'm also aware that these also affect real people and lives as well. And I would really want to know about the total recorded crime, how it impacts people, and also about stalking as well. I observed that from the dashboard that there's a total number of 40,417 as of the 30th and of July rather. And I really want some clarification as regards why there's been a reduction in the number of recorded crimes in this particular quarter. And also as regards stalking as well. Last year, I saw that the number was 808, and this quarter, it is 499. So I'd like to understand why there's a recorded, so why is it that there's a recorded incident of stalking? It seemed to have reduced from last year up until this quarter. Thank you.
Thank you. I can answer that, and I'll do it in two parts. So the total recorded crime that you asked about, the reduction in the number of recorded crimes, is largely due to counting rule changes, which have occurred in public order and stalking. The reduction in number of recorded crimes follows a steady trend of recorded crimes since December 2022, and this quarter isn't significantly lower than the months before. We did note a peak in May 22 compared with the previous quarter. In terms of stalking, in June 23, the counting rules again changed, and stalking offences between the same victim and offender are now recorded as linked crimes under the most serious offence. So this will reduce any over-recording of stalking crimes, and stalking crimes are recorded in a linked grouping and not individual crimes. So with each additional occurrence, therefore, that reduces the number of overall recorded incidents in terms of stalking. Does that answer? Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the dashboard? Anyone wants to raise? No? Happy? Okay, great, thank you very much for that. Okay, if we move on then, we move on to emerging issues. So this is just an opportunity for us to reflect on anything that's happened in recent weeks that we feel we may want some commentary on. I think the only thing I was going to flag, and Bissy, I don't know whether you want to add to this, about we've obviously seen a few knife crime incidents in the last few weeks, some quite nasty ones, so I don't know whether, Bissy, did you want to add to that?
Thank you very much. I've been really disturbed by and I guess, everybody in this room, about the recent increase in knife crime incidents, not just in St. Helens, also across the Merseyside as well. If it's okay, while some of these examples are quite disturbing, I would just like to, mention some of these examples. We've heard stories about teenage boys who have been stabbed after fights, and I know that there are friends and families who've said to me that they are scared of allowing their young ones to actually go out to the park to play. And we've also heard stories of a 14-year-old that was walking through a cemetery and he was actually threatened with a knife. So for me, really, I worry that this isn't just about the victims and the criminals, it's also about the wider community as well. There is a lot of fear out there. Like, most of us are scared about being threatened or being stabbed. So I'd really want to know what you are doing to actively tackle knife crime in the Merseyside, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take this one. We have, over significant periods, put a huge effort into tackling knife crime linked to our approach to tackling serious violence. We have a dedicated superintendent lead to it. We bring together our Operation Target, which is our focused serious violence and knife crime operation, with our drugs operations and our preventative work through the Violence Reduction Partnership, all of which are pretty mature. That said, we have seen an increase over the last 2 months in knife-related incidents and knife-related violence, particularly involving young people. Overall, serious violence is reduced 8.7% year on year this year compared to last year, and last year we reduced it over 15%, with a significant increase in young people. Under 25 cohort has seen, based on NHS data, not our own, a 33% reduction in the number of young people being admitted to hospital. So generally, knife crime is reducing, and again, knife crime again this year is reduced 11% compared to last year, noting that there has been an increase in incidents over the summer. So we'll double down on our efforts, that with our hotspots work, our community engagement work, and the local policing teams linking in with young people and communities. But I am really conscious that although there is some really good work going on, this extensive work going on, that communities do still on occasion feel scared and don't necessarily reflect community confidence, and feelings of safety doesn't reflect necessarily the fall in actual crime itself, and signal incidents like we've seen over recent weeks really impact that. So there's a real commitment for the force to do two things really. One is to continue and redouble our efforts in reducing knife crime, and the effectiveness I think I've shown in terms of the statistics, but that ongoing community engagement work and the development is one of the chief's priorities of our community engagement strategy, to link the meaningful crime reductions to actually really building those community and understanding within communities what we're doing and why, and the impact it's having, and actually impacting those feelings of safety and addressing some of that fear that you've described in communities. So really conscious of it, developing the community engagement strategy, which will launch shortly, and link the two together more closely. Thank you.
Okay, any other emergencies anyone wants to flag? No? Happy. Okay, great, thank you for that. Okay, so if we move on now then to the main focus for this meeting, which is around workforce, and I think you've got some slides you're going to take us through. Chief, are you starting with this, or Shirley? Oh, Jenny, sorry.
Commissioner, yes, I'm going to take the workforce slides. So the first slide there looks at the establishment, both police officers and police staff. So on the right-hand side there, you'll see is the total number of people, and it's a really positive picture, particularly in relation to our recruitment with Uplift and the maintenance of Uplift. And on the left-hand side there, you'll see our budgeted full-time equivalent. So that includes the likes of part-time workers, etc. That's why the figure is slightly higher. You'll see on the slide there that it says there's 220 Uplift unallocated. That now is actually 100 as a result of C4, and that's posts, not people. So when C4 is done, that will reduce down to 0. At the bottom there, you will see that we've got vacancies, and this is against our budgeted total, but we always run with a vacancy factor of 84.31 police officers, which equates to 2%, which is in the range in terms of our vacancy factor. The ongoing police officer attraction campaign continues, and we have attracted candidates from a wide pool of backgrounds, some really talented people coming into the organisation, and we've still got a series of police officer recruitment intakes planned throughout the remainder of the year, including a pool of transferees as well. We've seen far more transferees coming in than we've seen leaving the force, which is a really positive picture for Merseyside Police. And then that police officer actual full-time equivalent headcount, that includes the 851 student officers who are currently at various stages of their training journey across the multiple entry routes. And we're really proud of the variety of entry routes that we offer in Merseyside, and I think that's what makes us really attractive as a force as well.
Okay, great. Do you want to do PCSOs, and then we'll ask you questions about both things?
Okay, so in terms of PCSOs then, this slide here shows the PCSO actual versus the full-time equivalent projection versus reality. So you'll see that top line is where we should be at, which is the 236, and the bottom line, the red line, is the actual, and you'll see that the vacancy factor is 57 full-time equivalents. We've got 3 further PCSO intakes in September. I did the welcome for that intake last night. We've got another intake in October and another one in March. The October intake, we've got 39 in pre-employment checks for that. So out of that, that should yield between 25 and 26 for an intake of 20, which is really positive. And I think there's been great work there between strategic attraction, which works under people services, our comms team, and indeed the local policing strand as well, in really attracting people who want to come to be PCSOs and stay. And we are likely to see that attrition for PCSOs being lower moving forwards, because a lot of PCSOs over recent years have gone from being PCSOs into police officers. We're now left with a stable cohort of PCSOs who want to stay as police community support officers So it's a very stable pipeline at the moment.
Thank you. That was really interesting, and I have to say that last month I've been able to attend some of the attestations and passing out parades, and it's been an absolute joy to see the volume of numbers come through and the diversity within those groups. It's been fantastic. So, you know, credit to you all, and the staff at the training centre who are doing a really good job on that. I think what I wanted to ask was how do the numbers of officers and staff compare to the same time period over the past 3 years, and what kind of impact has Uplift had on those numbers?
So in terms of the increase, first of all, we've seen an increase over the last 3 years from 2020 of 12.9 increase in officers and 8.9 increase in staff. So in June 2023, we had 4137 officers and 2619 police staff, compared to June 2020, where we had 3663 officers and 2405 police staff. Really interesting, though, in terms of, if you look back historically in terms of some of those numbers, if you look back to April 2021, we had 4340 compared to June now, which is 4137 police officers. So in terms of where we have been and where we are now, the uplift has made a massive difference. But historically, obviously, there is some difference there in terms of numbers.
Sorry, did you say 2021? The last bit of data that
2020 is 3663 officers.
Your last bit.
So in terms of, 2011, 2011. Thank you, Chief. And then in terms of the uplift, we know the whole team across Merseyside Police have done really well to maintain those numbers, and we've actually put in for more in terms of those Home Office numbers, and then we are able to recruit further if required. So a really positive picture in terms of attraction into the force.
So we're confident then that we're on track in terms of meeting the uplift numbers, because obviously there's a penalty for forces that don't meet that requirement, but we're happy that we're in the right place for that.
Absolutely, we are absolutely in the right place.
Good. Okay. Bissy, do you want to ask about PCSOs?
All right, thank you very much. I observe that the projection seemed to be higher for the month of October, and if you look at the chart, the reality versus projection, it looks like the actual projection is linear, and there seems to be a zigzag movement, really. So just wondering why the projection is actually higher for the month of October. And I would like you to please, in simplistic terms, explain what your plans are to bring the number of the PCSO up to the actual budgeted number of 236. And finally, if it's okay for you to explain if this would have any effect on the budget in any way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that zigzag that you talk about on the red line, the reason for that is obviously we've got the intakes planned. So in terms of when we do projection for our numbers of PCSOs moving forwards, we will factor in a number of things, mainly what is our attrition projection looking like, and it's really positive at the moment for PCSOs, and what cohorts of people have we got planned to come into the organisation. So that's why you see that rise moving forward. So we had 11 PCSOs that I welcomed into the organisation last night, and we've got further intakes moving forwards, and I've talked about that intake in October. So that's why it will cause that zigzagged line. And it's really important to say that we've invested a lot of time and effort on top of a really busy picture for the force in terms of maintaining uplift. And as the Commissioner there has alluded to, there are financial penalties if we don't achieve, and we are absolutely on target to achieve. But what you'll see is, particularly for PCSOs, they will feature in multiple recruitment pipelines. So often they will apply for being a police officer at the same time as a PCSO. So we contend with all of that, and the team within People Services do a good job around that. So it is a stable pipeline moving forward. We recognise and really value the role of our police community support officers, hence the campaign and the joint work between ourselves and local policing to attract the best quality candidates in, and we've got a really good pipeline for PCSOs moving forwards. In terms of the vacancies, the question that you asked, obviously that's something we'll cover off later as part of our savings and investment programme.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Right, shall we move on then to the next slide?
So I think firstly this is about the police officer vacancy overview, and I think it's really important that we see this slide in the context of C4 because vacancies will change as C4 adds growth to a number of departments. So this is a fluctuating...
Do you want to just explain what C4 is, because we might not know?
So this is our programme of work where we are realigning... Chief, do you want to come in on? So it's our sorry, Deb, it's your programme.
Yeah, so the Community First Operating Review is a significant piece of review work that's been ongoing in terms of our operating model to make sure that we have got the right people in the right place at the right time to deliver the Community First strategy across Merseyside. So we're in the implementation phase now, so it's been obviously running for over 12 months now, and implementation will actually end towards the end of October, beginning of November. Part of the decisions that we have made in terms of moving staff into different places and realigning some of our deployment hubs and some of our staff in different places, they are predicated on the flow of student officers into the organisation that Jenny's just articulated in terms of the great work that we've done to bring in and recruit to our uplift total and beyond. We won't see the benefits of all of that Community First Operating Review work until those student officers all pass through the different stages of their training and become deployable out in terms of the different teams. That is happening on a week-by-week basis at the moment. So as you can imagine, we've been in uplift now for some considerable time. So we are seeing every month student officers passing through their student journey and becoming deployable into the teams. So that, I suppose, explains that piece of work that we've had running to make sure that with uplift, we're not just plonking people into different places. We've actually got science behind our operating model and how we deploy across all of the different teams and responsibilities that we have.
So if I just go back into the slide and I can explain a little bit more detail in terms of when some of those points in terms of staff dropping into those strands will occur. So the first bullet on the slide talks about the significant number of student officers, which the DEP's just talked about, who are at various stages in their training journey. And as you've articulated there, once signed off, will be posted to address those vacancies. And we have amended the student officer journey to make sure that we post students in earlier than we have done previously. The slide there articulates where there are currently vacancies across the force, but those obviously will reduce as student officers gain competence and are substantively promoted. You'll see that force-wide sergeants is there at the bottom. We've got a sergeant's process at the moment, promotion process running for an annual gap of 111 moving forward. So good succession planning in place in relation to that. The student officer journey, we talked about, that has been amended to make sure that we post students earlier. And over the remainder of the financial year, 300 student officers will complete their carousel and be substantively posted.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I think the benefit of having seen so many different entry routes for people to come into over the last few months has really opened my eyes as to the student journey. I think what would be really helpful, though, especially in relation to this slide, is for people to understand how long it takes for student officers to become operational officers so that they're actually on the ground doing the job. I mean, I know obviously they're on the ground all the time during their training, but how long does it take with the different routes for them to become fully operational officers?
So we have a number of routes that we operate within Merseyside Police. So we've just we've got 3 cohorts now coming through the organisation for our initial police learning development programme, and they will drop in much quicker in terms of independent patrol on that route. We've got the Police Constable Degree Apprenticeship Programme, and again, that is a route where there's an academic element to it, but it's absolutely grounded in operational reality, and officers will need to come into the university to do their input, but equally drop in at different points along the journey over that 3-year programme. The detective DHEP route, so our degree holder entry programme, we have a detective route and a non-detective route, and again, various stages in terms of which cohorts they are on. We very carefully factor all of those different routes into our programme for the following year, so that we make sure that we know when those students are dropping in on independent patrol, aligned to the strands and aligned to the force plan. So it differs in terms of which entry route they are on. But for R&R response and resolution, they will see a significant uplift by about November of this year. And then in terms of the detective DHEP route, we've seen some cohorts in, and again, investigations will really benefit from that moving forward. So some really careful planning with all of the strands to make sure that they drop in at the right time, and we organise our calendar in the right way.
Thank you so much. And the reason that I wanted to dig into that was to kind of almost get an understanding of, we talk a lot about uplift and we talk about, you know, X amount of new recruits and X amount of new recruits, but I think sometimes that understanding of, well, that doesn't mean that they're immediately going into the force and becoming operational, and that it takes a little bit of time for that to work through. And I think that's really important for us to understand in terms of public perception, and for you as a force as well, and for us when we're responding to inquiries. So thank you so much for that. It's really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, did you have a question on that?
Yes, thank you. I think as you spoke, you mentioned succession planning, right? So I'm just wondering if you can please explain that further. What does the succession planning look like for the staff? And just wondering if there's any information about the call handler, because I couldn't find any information on that.
Okay,
so please, if you can just please explain about the succession planning that you actually mentioned, please. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a head of organisational development, which is Eddie O'Grady, and working into him is our leadership capability and talent person who works closely across the strands with our people partners, looking at where people are coming up for retirement, where people are seeking to voluntarily leave the organisation, and we'll come on to that later on in the slides, and what our overall attrition looks like. And that person quite carefully coordinates with the strands where we need to run recruitment and attraction campaigns, but also what skills and abilities we need moving forwards for the organisation. So we have a new PDR, Professional Development Review process in place, which we've really successfully driven out through our Smartforce Oracle. All of the training moving forwards will be loaded onto that system, and we will be able to track people in the organisation in terms of what development they need, what skills they need, but also what skills the organisation needs moving forward. So that is work in progress. We've now got the right talent in place to manage that process and to work with the people partners and with strand leads to develop that further moving forwards.
Okay, thank you. Should we move on then to the next slide? Attrition.
Okay, so in terms of attrition patterns, this is really a really positive picture for us in Force, because the positive news story is that less officers have left than we projected. And I think the 7% pay rise, both for officers and staff, will really help moving forwards to reduce those voluntary resignations. We've done a lot of work across the force in relation to retention, understanding the reasons that people might want to leave, and putting measures in place to work with those individuals to see what we can do to retain talent. And that's tracked through our leadership board and really has paid dividends, as you can see on the slide. So the yellow line at the top is our projected attrition, and the red line below is the reality. And as you can see, the projected is much higher than the reality. both for police officers, which you can see on the left of the slide, and for PCSOs on the right. I'll give you an example there. In April to June, we projected 77 police officer leavers, and in reality, there was only 50 leavers, so 8 less in comparison to that same period in 22-23. And we always do that dynamic reprofiling of attrition in line with emerging patterns. So that is ongoing, and we take a lot of learning from the Police Uplift team that were in place nationally until recently. But attrition has been something that has been quite difficult for us to measure. But in terms of that picture, it's a really positive picture. And then in terms of the PCSOs, again, we do similar forecasting work to forecast potential attrition levels to aid our planning process. And attrition during 2023 was higher than actually predicted, and that was due to PCSOs joining as police officers. But April to June, we projected 9 leavers, but in reality, there was only 6. So again, a really positive picture. And we continue to do that dynamic reprofiling of attrition in line with emerging patterns ongoing against evaluated related plans.
Okay, and then in terms of staff, should we cover that one and then we'll come back to questions?
So in terms of police staff, again, you'll see that top line, the yellow line is the projected and the red line below is the reality. And again, it's a positive picture regarding retention. Attrition during 2023, slightly higher than predicted. And April to June, we projected 57 full-time equivalent leavers. But in reality, for police staff, there was actually only 46 full-time equivalent leavers. And again, we continue to do that dynamic reprofiling of attrition in line with those emerging patterns.
Great. Okay, thank you. So questions then in terms of looking at all the sets. Bissy, do you want to ask your questions first?
Thank you very much. I'm interested in finding out about retention. So when officers are leaving, do you sort of conduct some sort of exit interviews to find out maybe if there are specific reasons why they are leaving? So if you can please let us know what reasons do they sort of state when they leave? And also, if it's okay, I would also like to find out as well if there's any information about the attrition pattern for officers, PCSOs of ethnic minority background. Thank you.
Okay. So firstly, in terms of what do we do to find out what the reasons that people are leaving? There is a national pro forma that we use in Merseyside where we do exit interviews should people want to fill them out. We make sure that we get as many of those filled out. We've put systems in place that flag early if somebody is thinking of leaving so that strands can have that conversation early to see if there's something in place. But we absolutely fill out that national survey. People Services then look at that through our people partners, and any trends and patterns in relation to that are both picked up within the leadership board, the governance that I chair, but also in local conversations through the people partners and the strands. And in terms of numbers of leavers, we saw 139 leavers from April to July. But bearing in mind 35% of those were on retirement. So, a large proportion of those are predicted people that we know that will be leaving. But out of the people who are not retiring, we absolutely follow up, ask the right questions and see what we can do to retain talent. And that's been really successful.
And then about the ethnicity, do you monitor that?
Yes, so we monitor the ethnicity of our officers and staff leaving. We absolutely pick up the reasons for that, and that's monitored through our inclusion board. And I'll bring Robin here through the Police Race Action Plan in terms of any trends and patterns that we're seeing around that.
Sorry, Morning Commissioner. No, there's no discernible trends. The only thing that I would add to that is obviously we've got a comprehensive staff support network that are also there to kind of flag any trends to line managers and people services as well.
Do you need to ask yours?
Thank you. Just two from me. It's good to hear about the exit interviews and that you're monitoring that really closely. I guess I wanted to just probe a little bit deeper and say what are kind of the key themes. I'm interested as to why younger people who are coming in are leaving. I know you said 35% retirement age, but those who are younger, do you know what are the key themes coming through as to why they're leaving? And then I suppose the second question was really, how do we minimise, or how are you minimising the impact on victims when an officer or a staff member moves roles either within the organisation or leaves completely? How are you contingency planning for that to make sure that those victims are still receiving a good service?
Yeah. Okay. It is. So in terms of the first question, why are people leaving? Before I answer that question, I think it's really important to say that in terms of attrition across our entry routes, our attrition levels in Merseyside are lower than for other forces. So for PCDA, or Police Constable Degree Apprenticeship route, we've got about a 10% attrition rate, but we have a younger level of people joining us. In terms of our detective DHEP route, it's only 4% at the moment in terms of that route, and our DHEP is at 7%. And in terms of our IPLDP, our initial police learning development programme, as it's a fairly new route, we haven't lost anybody on that route to date. So why have we lost people? The main theme that's coming out is money. In terms of struggling to cope financially in terms of the wage. So that's why I say in terms of the pay rise, that is really welcome moving forwards. The other reason is not for me, and you will always get that. Every force will get that in terms of, I thought policing was going to be this, but the reality is actually very different, and it's not for me. And it's important that people make that decision early on because it won't be for everybody. And we work really hard to make sure that we factor in those reasons for leaving into our recruitment process very early on. So when we're talking to people right throughout the recruitment process, when we're talking to them as part of the induction process, so that the reality matches what they think that they're coming in, so that we can continue to push down and reduce those attrition levels. So we've had a lot of success, and we will continue to do that moving forwards. And then the second question.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, so the second question revolves around the impact on victims when we do see officers changing roles or indeed leaving the organisation. We have currently somewhere in the region of around 13,500 open crimes at this moment in time under investigation. Around 10,500 of those sit with the investigative strand. There's a real clear governance process that we've put in place around that through supervisory checks on a monthly basis, and then that increases through rank. So inspectors check it on a 16 weeks, chief inspectors after 32 weeks, and so on. Within that process of review by supervisors, part of that review involves making sure that the victim updates are being complied with as per the victim's wishes, and therefore if we have staff leaving either the organisation or indeed changing roles, we ensure that that crime is either handed over to a new officer with a thorough briefing and the victim is updated around that, or on some occasions it might be appropriate because of the nature of the crime that officer, despite moving, takes that crime with them. So there is a real clear process around how we manage that to ensure real quality for victims.
The other bit that I would add to that, Commissioner, we have a tactical workforce management group and a strategic workforce management group, so that makes sure that in terms of the numbers of officers and staff with the right capabilities, we look at to see who is leaving, and then that tactical workforce group will look to see what movement is required to make sure that we then slot new officers and staff into the right roles, thinking ahead.
And so I think final question on this, and I suppose it builds on that, given the fact that we are probably, we've got quite a very young in service workforce now. So obviously we've spoken about losing a lot of experienced people through retirement and various other things. And because there was such a big gap for such a long time, how are you managing that in terms of having lots of younger in service, I suppose more inexperienced officers coming in and maybe losing some of that expertise higher up?
So that is a challenge for the force. So firstly, just making sure that in terms of our younger in service officers, that they have the right talent, mentoring and supporting them. So we obviously have our professional development unit within the academy that manages student officers. We've got a student welfare officer as well that picks up any concerns that people might have working in areas and make sure that they are connected with people who are skilled and able to talk them through the process. So our unit within the academy supports student officers throughout the whole of their journey. We make sure then we've got the right talent pool in terms of tutor constables to mentor and support them within each of the strands. And we have really good relationships at all levels in the strands, between the strands and the academy, so that any concerns that student officers might have or any further support that they may have is picked up early, action plans are put in place and the right support is put in place. But it is challenging with the number of student officers that we've had in. It is a challenge for our tutor constables in terms of, you know, some of them have done back-to-back tutoring and have done a fantastic job. But it's a challenge that we've risen to and will continue to rise to in the force.
Great, thank you. OK, if we move on then to the next one. I think workforce broke down. Yeah.
Okay, so this slide we used in our inclusion board fairly recently, and I think it's really helpful because what it shows is our population against the new census data. So I think it's quite a complex slide. So if I could just guide yourself, Commissioner, over to the right-hand side, which is the column on the end, which we find really useful in terms of where we need to be thinking about with our strands and wider for targeted recruitment. And I think it gives us a really good baseline for what the demographic composition of the Merseyside population looks like. But there are some caveats that I just want to talk you through in terms of the slide. If you look at the census data in relation to sexual orientation, obviously not everybody wants to disclose. We've done an awful lot of work in force so that people are able to bring their true selves to work and feel able to disclose. But obviously there are still some barriers there to honest disclosure. But you'll see there we have 3% more than the census data in terms of sexual orientation, which is really positive. The disability data is a really interesting one. So the disability data is showing 22%. However, the disability data, when you looked at the question set, it asked how much someone's disability limited their daily activities rather than whether somebody had a legally recognised disability or not. So the figures reflect all respondents who answered with a little or a lot. So some caution in relation to that. And then you'll note there that Liverpool is significantly more diverse at 15.97% minority ethnic respondents compared to the other local policing areas at 4.84 minority ethnic respondents.
OK, sorry, I just asked them to move on because I think you were referring to the Merseyside police figures, so it's obviously helpful to see the comparison.
Yes, so sorry, so in terms of the workforce, I'll move on to that one.
Yeah.
If you look at the officers in terms of the in terms of the percentage, this is where what our current workforce looks like. So we are underrepresented for females there, as you can see from the top line. In terms of ethnic minorities, when you look at the 2021 census data, we should be at 8.3%. If we look at our population, we are at 3.65%. But that gap is closing over time due to the work that we're doing across the force through the inclusion board and the significant investment that we've put into our outreach team, which we will no doubt talk about shortly. Yes, they're the main points that I'd like to raise, Commissioner.
Thank you. All right. I'd like to find out the strategies or maybe campaigns that you are maybe putting in place to actively recruit people of ethnic minority, in particular Black people, because we know that campaigners will raise awareness about equality, say that, you know, everybody isn't starting from the same point. So I really want to know the strategies that you are actually putting in place to actively recruit people like me, basically. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of making sure that we address the disproportionality that I've just talked about and actively recruit from all communities, We hold an inclusion board quarterly, and we look at the data, and the data now that we've got is really granular in terms of the census data, and then what does our gap look like in numbers for every category there. So that's really helpful for me as the chair, just to see where the gaps are, but particularly for our outreach team, but also the force, because everybody across the force has a responsibility for recruitment and engagement, for them to be able to see as well, and to ensure that we reflect our workforce. So firstly, we've got a community engagement team, which feeds into John Roy, sat behind me, and they proactively build relationships with underrepresented communities. We've also got our outreach team, the goals of which are to attract people from underrepresented communities to work for Merseyside Police, and that is about really understanding the barriers and making sure that we put in place actions to overcome them. Interestingly, we've done a lot of work. Some of it is not around attraction, actually. Some of it we attract underrepresented groups in. Some of it is about making sure that in terms of our process, that our process then isn't taking some of those underrepresented groups out by pressing the wrong button, etc. So that's where the outreach team then are able to come in, individually speak to candidates and see what additional support and mentoring they need to get everybody to the same starting line, which I think is really important. So we have seen movement in our figures as a result of that positive action through the outreach team to get people to the same starting line, and we will continue with passion with that work moving forwards.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Move on to the next slide.
So this next slide shows the Merseyside population demographics, sex and ethnicity by rank and grade. You'll see that there's not an appreciable difference in minority ethnic representation between the sexes for officers, with the possible exception of chief inspectors. And then you'll see that there's significantly less minority representation amongst male staff compared to female staff, especially at the senior grade G plus grades. None of the 183 G plus grade staff are minority ethnic males, compared to 6 being minority ethnic females.
So do you have a plan in place in terms of helping to support women and ethnic minorities to move up ranks and seek more senior positions?
Absolutely. So we've worked really hard and will continue to work really hard to increase the representation of female officers and staff in terms of our recruitment. And we have seen recruitment intakes for police officers for women go from 30% in 2018-19 to 49% in 2022 to 23. And that's through positive recruitment campaigns, the strategic attraction role that we've got in place now in force, pushing through the strands, that everybody sees the opportunity to be out there recruiting, because they understand where the gaps are in our workforce. In addition, to ensure continued development, we offer positive action support for women. So we've got our Pedals programme, which is recognised as best practice by the College of Policing. And we've also got an external programme called Frontline Leadership, which is delivered by Police Now. And both of those are development programmes which encourage women to reach their goals, whether that be personal or career focused, to build confidence. And then to address the gender balance in leadership role, we carried out an internal survey and interviews to really try and understand the barriers to promotion. And that included those who'd passed their exam but not applied for promotion, and indeed those who'd applied and been through the process, and those who were marked as exceptional in their PDR, who were not seeking promotion, just to find out why and see what support was needed to be put in place. And following that feedback, we've introduced additional support for promotion processes in the form of positive action workshops, and we've also introduced mentors and buddies for the process, which received great feedback, and we will continue to offer this for promotion processes moving forwards. A final couple of points, our gender equality network that promotes a healthy workplace for all genders, and working alongside them, we've been able to offer the Menopause Cafe, the endometriosis support group, alongside other support that's beneficial to men and women in the workplace. And it would be remiss of me not to mention the excellent leadership programme that we do with the military for women as well, about stepping forward, confidence to go for different roles, and that's been really well received as well. So there's a lot in place to promote those groups coming forwards.
Brilliant. And then in terms of, and we might come on to this in the race action plan, but in terms of then minority officers and staff, again, is there similar kind of support in place to encourage them to apply and remove barriers and things?
Absolutely. I can go into more detail if you want, but there's absolutely a number of programmes in place to support colleagues there to make sure, one, we support them in the ranks, but two, that we support that talent coming through the organisation. And that's closely monitored both through the inclusion programme of work, but also the police race action plan work that reports into the inclusion board as well.
Great, thank you. And I know we're going to come on to that shortly. OK, next slide.
So in terms of this slide, we have a total of 125 special constables. At the moment, 57 are independent, 58 are student officers, and 10 are new recruits in training. In terms of, there are some recommendations there in terms of how many special constables we should have in force from the national, and we've agreed a benchmark target figure of around 200. But we, due to natural wastage, obviously, again, a bit like the PCSO picture, in terms of specials, the uplift, obviously, I think it's a success story in terms of people, some people come in as specials and then wanting to join as police officers, so that passport system is really effective, but equally, it then means that for the gaps that are left behind, then we need to fill those gaps. So it's been a challenging picture in terms of recruitment for specials, but one that we continue to put a lot of effort in with some good success. So we've got 4 intakes of special constables of 20 that we do annually, which is planned into the academy. And we are currently making sure that we fill up those intakes, working closely with the Strand with our attraction plan that is in place.
Okay, great. So obviously you've touched on then the fact that we've lost quite a few because they've been recruited into the force, which is really welcome. In terms of that recruitment campaign, do you have any sense as to whether we're seeing less people coming forward to volunteer for specials, either because, you know, cost of living crisis, people have less free time, or, you know, the appetite isn't there? Do you have any sense as to whether we're seeing less people apply for that role?
Yeah, pick that one up, Christian. I think what we're not seeing is people leaving, and as part of their exit interviews, they're not telling us they're leaving because they're going to other paid employment. So we're not getting that indication that people are leaving for other paid employment. What we don't know is whether it's preventing us from people volunteering in the first place. But what we're not seeing is a decline in the numbers of people applying for other voluntary roles within Merseyside Police to the same extent. So I think what we have recognised is that we need to broaden our recruitment and attraction pool, so looking more to people who will give us more than the sort of 4 to 5 year average commitment that people are giving us now, and that's not in any way a criticism. We get an enormous service from our colleagues in the special constabulary. You know, that we ask for a minimum of 16 hours commitment a month, and you can see from the statistics on the table we're getting on average double that, and that's a huge commitment from voluntary police officers. But I think, as Jenny said earlier, it's a difficult and challenging role being a police officer, and particularly, you know, these are all engaged in frontline duties, dealing with the same challenges and the same traumas that regular colleagues are, but without pay. So it is a constant push to attract people in, and we also face competition from neighbouring forces who are also seeking to offer some kind of incentivisation sometimes in terms of the skills offered that we can't always match. So a real challenge to keep that pipeline coming, but a huge effort from Jenny's team, from the existing special constables and the community engagement unit, to keep that pipeline open, looking constantly to increase and diversify our pool of talent in our special constabulary.
Great, thank you. Jeannie?
Thank you. I'm always amazed by the volunteers and the special constables. When I went to the celebration event a few months ago, the stories that came out, it was phenomenal, the impact that they have, and hearing them talk about how much they value being a part of the work that they do, it was brilliant. I'd love to know, kind of, in terms of the training that they have, what is the specific set of training that they have to be a special constable?
So as you'd expect, it's significant because people are deployed. When they're deployed in a police uniform, they're deployed with a full range of policing powers, and I think members of the public will not distinguish between a regular and a special officer and would expect the same level of service and commitment from each, and that's what they receive. And so the training reflects that. The first phase is a 28-week training course, classroom-based, skills-based, where we're asking people to attend for 14 out of those 28 weekends, 14 weekends within that 28-week period. So straight away, you can see there's a really challenging commitment from members of the public who are volunteering to become voluntary police officers within the Special Constabulary. The next phase is an accompanied patrol phase, so similar to the tutor constable phase. As you'd anticipate, it takes longer because it's you know, we're getting on average 25 to 35 hours a month from each of our volunteers. And then when that's completed, we move on to the third phase, which is again accompanied patrol, but where the officer is building their portfolio towards independent patrol, and that can take 12 to 18 months quite easily to achieve. Because, going back to my point earlier, when we deploy people, we deploy them with the full range of powers. We deploy them as a uniformed officer, and members of the public don't discriminate or distinguish between a volunteer officer and a regular paid officer, and should quite rightly expect the same level of quality and professionalism and service from them. And that's absolutely, I think your experience is the same as mine. That's what they receive, and the training reflects that. It's intensive, it's long, and it's difficult.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on that? No? Okay, right, next slide. Oh, sorry, we didn't touch on this one. Did you want to just cover off what they do or comment on this one?
Number of events on there. You know, we ask again. We always ask our colleagues in the Special Constabulary to volunteer for ops and events, but that's only a fraction of what they do. So what we see is a pretty even split between specials who are sort of aligned to neighbourhood policing, so within community teams, serving in communities, the traditional role of the special constable. An equal number, however, work in Jonathan's world with the response teams, where they double crew vehicles with the response colleagues and get involved in the full measure of response policing. We now have 5 of our officers who are specially trained with a number of skills that allow them to deploy alongside the roads policing unit. And I was delighted to present a number of them with the white hats that traffic officers wear, and that reflects their particular commitments and the particular skill set that they've gained over a period of, well over a year, on top of having qualified as an independent patrol officer. And then the latest development is to include special constables within investigations. So not necessarily carrying an investigative workload, but supporting our detectives and our investigators in developing their inquiries and their investigations, particularly in terms of burglary. So evidence gathering, evidence capture, interviewing witnesses. And again, we have to ask that the full 16-hour minimum commitment is given then to that investigation strand to allow them to effectively support investigators. So it's an offer to develop the skill set. It bolsters our investigative capacity, and also it helps attract people in who may wish to become investigators in the future or see themselves volunteering in that world. So a real diversity of deployment. We try and give people as much opportunity as we possibly can, and that's quite right, as well as the events that we see them taking an equal part on, and a really, critical role for us, particularly in the nighttime economy. That's not always an easy deployment, and regularly we see significant numbers of people volunteering to take part in that deployment, which is outstanding.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so moving on now, I think we move on to sickness. Yes, do you want to run through these slides?
Okay, so the first, the top box there shows police officers, and the bottom box there shows police staff. So if I start with police officer, year-to-date sickness rates, 5.6% for female and 3.5% for males, which is significantly below the 2022-23 rates of 6.6% and 4.5%. Compared to the same quarter last year, female officer sickness reduced by 1.2%, whilst male officer sickness reduced by 0.7%. Moving on to police staff, our year-to-date sickness rates 6.4% for females, which is noticeably below the 2022-23 average of 7.4%, whilst the male year-to-date of 5.2% is close to the 2022-23 average of 5.4% for males. And compared to the same quarter last year, female sickness is down 0.4%, whilst male staff sickness is virtually unchanged. So this next slide shows the Merseyside Police Force sickness reasons. So stress and psychological disorder continue to be the single biggest reason of hours lost, especially amongst officers. A proposal to help address this is continued in terms of the wellbeing data capture that we are doing. And the hours lost attributed to cases with the sickness reasons of miscellaneous or others are the second largest group. And efforts are underway to really improve our reporting practices, particularly under the miscellaneous and other category. We've recently uploaded guides onto our recording system so that if people aren't sure which category to put people in, they've got a guide. They can also go through the policy advisors or the people partners if they're not sure. So we've had a real push across the force to make sure that people don't put people in that category, and actually we get a truer sense across each of those categories moving forwards.
John, did you want to ask your thing about the myths?
I mean, I think Sue's addressed most of it. The other column is blank. I mean, miscellaneous other, but you also got blank on it.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work in relation to these categories. I think the categories are right. We've had a lot of debate and force in terms of, how easy is it for people to understand which categories. The blank one, again, a real push around data quality and making sure that people categorise sickness in the right way and understand the why as well, because obviously we're able then to make sure that we put the right response in place if we understand what the sickness trends are. So we've done a lot of work and we'll continue to push that moving forwards.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Okay, so this slide is the force sickness rates for response and resolution up to June 2023. The top box shows police officers and the bottom police staff. Female sickness rates in response and resolution have been reducing significantly, having stayed below male rates since January. Police officers, year-to-date sickness rates of 5.6% for female and 3.5% for males, again significantly below the 2022-23 rates of 6.6% and 4.5%. Compared to the same quarter last year, female officer sickness has reduced to 2.8%, whilst male officer sickness has reduced 0.9%. In terms of police staff, year-to-date sickness rates for female staff at 5.9% is dramatically below the 2022-23 rate of 9.6%, whilst for male staff the year-to-date of 9.3% is higher than the preceding average of 7.2%. And compared to the same quarter last year, female staff sickness is down 4.1%, whilst male staff sickness is up 2.1%.
I'm just conscious that there's probably going to be, we'll go through all of them and then we'll ask questions because I imagine the answers will be similar across all of them. So,
okay. And then response and resolution, Merseyside Police Force sickness, response and resolution up to June 2023. There's the categorisation. The hours lost sickness reason distribution for response and resolution closely mirrors that for the whole force, except the staff figures are much lower across the board due to the significantly higher number of officers in the Strand. And within these staff figures, the degree to which the stress psychological category exceeds all other sickness reasons for hours lost does stand out. And I think, just to add, and I'm sure we'll come on to it, the significant investment that the force has put into our occupational health unit, particularly with a focus on psychological support, I think has paid real dividends and will continue to pay real dividends moving forwards in terms of support for officers and early intervention and prevention in terms of that sickness category. And then moving on to the investigation strand, again, this is showing up to June 2023. Staff sickness was suffering a dramatic gender disparity early this year, but that gap has since contracted. In terms of police officers, year-to-date sickness rates, 6.2% for female officers and 3% for male officers, significantly below the 2022-23 rates of 7.6% and 3.5%. Compared to the same quarter last year, female officer sickness reduced by 1.4%, whilst male officer sickness reduced by 0.5%. Police staff in the investigation strand, year-to-date sickness rates of 5.9% for female staff and 2.9% for male staff, slightly above the rates of 5% and 2.6% for 2022-23. And compared to the same quarter last year, male staff sickness rate is virtually unchanged, but the female officer sickness is 2.5% higher.
So it's quite positive in terms of all the data you've gone through so far all seems to be showing a reduction, which is really welcome. But I think this is the only one where you've got staff in investigation, and particularly women, who have seen a slight increase. Do you have any sense as to why that is?
Commissioner, this is something that we've seen over a number of years, and I noted in my previous role as the head of crime. We've looked into the figures. Large portions of it was stress related, but not always work related stress. About 3/4 of the issues that we rose were related to stress related to home life, and we've done a lot of work around wellbeing around that. I do note that it's starting to come back down, which is a good thing. But it has been a historic picture that we haven't been able to get straight to the bottom to, other than to say, as I say, that the stress-related issues largely tended to be outside of work.
Commissioner, I'll probably just come in, obviously, in terms of the challenges across the force over the last couple of years have been well discussed and well publicised. They've been quite acute within the investigation strand for obvious reasons. And clearly that has had an impact in terms of the stress and the strain across the workforce, which is why many of the measures that Jenny has articulated in terms of our investment in OHU and all of the measures that are built in place to support staff across the organisation have had a positive impact within the whole force, but particularly in investigations. And certainly I've had that direct feedback going out and about across the force, just sitting with staff as they're going about their business.
Thank you. I was just going to add, Commissioner, just because I think it's important just for us to just realise the extent to which the force has invested, and you know, it is paying dividends in terms of some of those figures coming through. You know, we've talked about the relaunch of the occupational health unit, the additional resources that we've put into in terms of the force psychologist and the physiotherapist as well, often working on the whole person, the two services working closely throughout, but that work is really promoted out in the stations. The Oscar Kilo van is regularly out across the force, again with both sides of the OHU represented in that. We've got the drop-in sessions throughout the force each week with the in-house counsellors offering psychological support. We've got the drop-in sessions with the psychotherapist, and again, people can self-refer in as well as being referred in in by line manager. Commented on from other forces. We've got the introduction of the peer supporters within the force with over 130 individuals trained. We've got the psychoeducational workshops. We've got the 2-day wellbeing break at St Michael's Lodge. We've also got the critical stress management debrief, and again, a lot of positive feedback post really traumatic incidents, how we are debriefing those. The wellbeing inputs that we're doing to the new starters, and particularly the family liaison officers, I think that's really critical and a really good investment. I talked last night around the employer assistance programme, not just for officers and staff, but also for their families as well. So a significant investment there by the force. And we've seen the therapy lists, waiting lists, reduced down from 10 plus months, down to between 10 to 12 weeks. And obviously we can fast track people in if needed. We've got the group therapy programmes running. We've got better utilisation of the support services such as the Ben Fund. And then we've got the ongoing work in relation to the high-risk roles, which is a significant programme of work for the Occupational Health Unit for the force, but really important that we invest in that area of business. So I think we really are seeing that investment come through in the figures.
Great, thank you. Okay, next slide.
So this is for local policing in terms of sickness reasons. So for officers, local policing sickness hours loss distribution closely matches that of response and resolution and the whole force, except that musculoskeletal accounts for a higher proportion, almost matching hours lost attributed to miscellaneous and others. And then for staff, local policing sickness hours lost distribution is far more even amongst the top groups, with stress, psychological being slightly below miscellaneous other and not much higher than the musculoskeletal.
Okay, great. So I think there's similar patterns then across all the different strands, notwithstanding the comment about investigations that we've highlighted. We did have some questions about support measures, but I think you've detailed that quite well, which is helpful. Is there anything else we've missed? Did you want to ask anything? Yeah, do you want to ask something?
Much, Commissioner. I observed that COVID was also listed as well as a sickness reason, and you will agree with me that we're still in the post-pandemic sort of era. So what are the processes that is put in place for an employee who might test positive to COVID?
So in terms of COVID, it's really interesting how in terms of our smarter working policy, we have seen behavioural change, as not just in policing but across society, where people are feeling unwell. We are seeing that some people having honest conversations with their teams in terms of can they work from different locations, so that in terms of spreading illness to colleagues, I think people are being far more thoughtful around that, which I think is really helpful. And I think our smarter working policy certainly supports officers and staff in that approach as well. So I think we're far more mature in our approach around that, and that clearly, I think, is supporting in terms of less infection amongst our staff. We obviously have got the people partners and the policy advisors who can advise people in relation to long-term COVID, and our policies support officers and staff who may be struggling with that as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So I think that's the end of the main section of workforce. I am going to go back slightly. There are a couple of other questions that, just in terms of the work that's being done around recruitment and the additional numbers and some other issues that have been raised, and then we'll take a break after that. So some of the questions that have come up, because we are recruiting additional numbers and quite quick succession, so there's a couple of questions around how we're managing that from a HR point of view, and I'm aware there's been quite a high turnover of staff and vacancies within the HR particularly. You mentioned around training for and support for new starters, new officers, for around tutor constables, for example, and have you got enough tutor constables in place to be able to provide that for the new incoming officers? And similarly, in terms of police driver standards Have you got the capacity to be able to do the training that's needed to get the new recruits trained to meet the police driver standards? Sorry, there was lots of questions there.
Okay, Commissioner. So if we start around the vacancy rate question around the People Services Department, we are fully staffed within our People Services Department. We don't have a high turnover of staff. And the only roles that we are currently recruiting for are a Grade C and Grade E for the payroll contract and obviously the McLeod pensions requirements. And I have to say, in terms of that payroll and pensions team, it is a tough recruitment market in terms of skills. We've got a really skilled team now. We've been able to attract some of the best talent into that team. So high confidence in that team, doing a fantastic job. In terms of the police driver standards, in terms of your question around driver training, firstly, we have our training needs analysis, which identifies how many courses we need over the year. And in terms of the academy, we have met the number of courses that we said that we would deliver as part of that training needs analysis. However, we constantly, because of the new people coming into the force, obviously that puts additional pressure into the academy in terms of those training needs. So we have put incentives in place to make sure that we both retain our driver trainers, but also for attraction of future talent coming into the team. Driver training have had an uplift in that team, and we have started the year with standard courses being a priority and other driving courses being scaled back to facilitate this. We plan to deliver 67 courses this year and potentially will provide up to 200 places moving forwards. And of course, there's various factors that can influence this, driver availability, vehicle availability being the main areas. And obviously, we work closely with the Strands to make sure, and with Keith and his team to make sure that we've got the right vehicles to provide the training in. The driver training unit have also been asked to increase the number of carrier drivers as an organisational priority, and this is another factor that we've already planned into our training calendar moving forwards. And then as a wider issue, numbers are currently agreed with the Strand leads, as I've said, for those standard car course places, and nominations for those come through our management support teams who prioritise then the course places that can be allocated. And then in terms of, was there another question around tutor constables,
yeah,
Commissioner?
Have we got enough tutor constables, or how are we recruiting them?
So it has been a challenge, particularly for the force, as it has been for all forces across the country, in terms of numbers of student officers coming in and numbers of tutor constables being available to tutor them. However, it's a more positive picture moving forwards because as of September onwards, we will see a steady decline in the amount of student officers requiring tutor constables. And as such, the numbers that we've currently got, particularly in response and resolution and local policing, absolutely appear to be sufficient. Tutor constables, they're doing a fantastic job. They volunteer for the role, and due to the uplift numbers, we did get some feedback that some tutors were feeling the pressure in relation to that. But with the student numbers reducing, this will give some tutors some rest in between the excellent tutoring that they do. The Academy, we run a tutor constable course each month, and the course is being reviewed to streamline that and to make sure that we reduce abstraction from those courses and to make it even more appealing to officers wanting to apply moving forwards. And then in terms of tutor PCSOs, I think it's important that we touch on that as well. We've got sufficient tutors to meet demand for the student PCSOs for the next intake numbers. and again, we'll make sure that as part of people's CPD, as part of their PDR, that is all factored in, and that we make sure that we give the appropriate recognition to those people who do a fantastic job to bring the next generation of police officers and PCSOs on in the future.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So we're going to take a break now, and then we will come back. And then we'll come back and do the race action plan. So 10-minute break, and then we'll be back. If we can pause. Yep. Okay, good stuff. Welcome back. Thank you, everybody. Right, we're moving on now to the race action plan. So we had an update on this time last year after the force had just introduced it, and so now we've asked for an update to see how it's getting on. So Jenny, over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Firstly, before I just go into the work streams, just to set a little bit of context around the investment that Merseyside Police has put into the Police Race Action Plan. So firstly, we have a board, the Inclusion Board, which I chair, and the Police Race Action Plan reports into that Inclusion Board on a quarterly basis, and we have checkpoint meetings with each of the leads on a monthly basis. And in terms of its reach across the force, there are a multitude of people now who are bought into and delivering work on the Police Race Action Plan. So it is a force-wide inclusive piece of work led through the lead for inclusion, who is Julie Cook, and the overarching day-to-day lead through Rob Budden, both of whom have done a significant amount of work over the last 12 months on the Police Race Action Plan delivery. The programme of work for the Police Race Action Plan, obviously, it's been overlaid with the Diversity, Equality, Inclusion MPCC toolkit to make sure that where there's overlap, that we identify and pick up on that. Abby Johnson from the ISOB has been up to force and obviously has met key stakeholders as well, and I know that you've met her as well. And again, we've really listened to the feedback that she's given around how we manage this programme of work, the involvement of lived experience and the involvement of different ranks and roles in the programme of work, which I think is really important. The second bit is we've had a lot of support from the NBPA, the Black Police Officers Association, and again, a lot of work with Rob through the FOR network to make sure that there's really good engagement with our own internal network, but also the national picture as well. And we have also engaged with the new national programme manager as well to make sure that we are linked in at every stage and learning wherever we can. So that's Dr. Commander Alison Nadari. We've also listened to feedback from the stakeholder groups, and I know you're there as well as the Chief. And just in terms of the next stakeholder meetings, we've got one on Friday the 15th of December at St Helens Town Hall, and then the next one is in the 5th of March at Bootle Town Hall. And why do I mention that? Because the stakeholder group said that they wanted us out there in different areas. They wanted to be not on police premises, and that's just one small example of how we continue to listen to people with lived experience and make sure that at every stage we are informed and reflecting on the feedback that they have given to us to influence the work streams moving forwards. So in terms of work stream 1 then, black people and communities are properly represented within policing, with an internal culture that promotes inclusivity and supports their development and progression. So we've got leads in place for this work stream, and the first bit I want to touch on really is the work of the outreach team. So in partnership with the recruitment team, they've delivered an attraction strategy to promote Merseyside Police as an employer of choice to people from all underrepresented groups. And given the gap in black and ethnic minority officers, which we monitor against the new census data, so we're very clear about what that gap is and what we are doing to address it, we've got a strategy in place to increase the diversity of the workforce and the recruitment pipeline. And I think this links into my comments earlier around the attraction piece actually is good. What we now need to do is further work around our internal processes to make sure that we're not taking talent out and that we get everybody to the same starting point. So making sure that every bit of the process, both internally but also as part of the College of Policing as well, working with the national team, that we are looking at every part of the process. So we have got a set of tools and a support package in place, such as advice, guidance and coaching, which really does support applicants through the application process. And we're working really closely with the community engagement unit, with local policing, with response and resolution, partners, community leads, to make sure that we really connect with and support people from underrepresented groups, really understand what the barriers are to joining, and making sure that we put measures in place that are meaningful to overcome them. In terms of the outreach team, we've done a lot of work around the data to make sure that we take disproportionality out of our recruitment processes. We did do some school events, and we've done a lot of school events, but actually in partnership with local policing and the community engagement unit, we've upskilled officers now who are already in those schools for engagement purposes, which is unlike other forces, so that they have the requisite skills to do that. So we're widening our approach and our approach to bringing talent in. We're looking at events that we're at where our conversion rates are not good, and then realigning resource to where our conversion rates are good, and that is reaping significant benefits. So more of the outreach team now are attending those high impact events in collaboration with officers and staff from across the force to bring different dynamic to the stories we share with people to attract difference to come and work for us. We've got a real focus on overcoming the systemic barriers that are in place once we've attracted someone to apply. And we've got a real focus on the data. We understand the data much better now, including looking at the geographical heat map so that we are really targeting the areas that we need to be in and working with the right people within communities, maintaining that trust and confidence. And I think we've got even closer relationships now with individuals from underrepresented groups. And I think there've been many examples, just in this last month, where people have dropped out of the recruitment process and we were able to have the conversation, understand why, is it a technical issue, etc., to make sure that they re-enter the recruitment process and actually we get everybody to the same starting point in terms of going through that process. And we're really challenging the organisation on some of the barriers. We've done some great work with the vetting team, and certainly, particularly for underrepresented groups, we've got an escalation process. So where somebody from an underrepresented group, because we know there are barriers in relation to vetting, it is more difficult in some cases, that has an escalation process into the Deputy Chief Constable, and we individually look at all of those cases that have failed vetting to check that there isn't disproportionality and unfairness in the process. And again, I've touched on there, we've been working closely with the College of Policing to really influence some of those recruitment practices and make sure that learning is brought not only into Merseyside but wider as well. The other bit that I just wanted to talk about there, I just wanted to say thank you, Commissioner, for the investment that you've personally put into our work with the local training provider, the Anthony Walker Foundation, to deliver the anti-racism training force-wide. And I think just to refresh our memories, where did that come from? That came from our first stakeholder group, where our stakeholders said, we want a local provider and we want a provider that we trust and have confidence in. We've really listened to that and made sure that who we've engaged with are the right people to be working with. And the training's been designed to ensure that all officers and staff can have a better understanding of the origins of racism set in a local Merseyside context, which is what our stakeholders said they wanted, the impact of systemic racism in UK society and how that affects the relationship between the black community and policing. Those first sessions started at the end of April and we are continuing to roll those out. 1,500 people have been through that process to date and we are now doing 360 people a week. And of note, Rob, I don't know whether you want to talk about the academic work, which I think is really giving us that independent view around the training that we've put in place.
Yes, can do. Thanks, Ma'am. Yeah, so the training's in place now and rolling out, and in addition to that, we've got some academic work that we've commissioned from the Institute of Social Equity. So this is about independent evaluation of the wider programme and the programme itself. So that will enable us to do a couple of things. It will enable us to look at where the training has and hasn't landed within the organisation, but also help us to integrate our leadership training approach with an anti-racist mindset, so that people in the future doing leadership courses will receive that component as part of a standard training. Just further to that, we have involved the consultants working with the Anthony Walker Foundation in our stakeholder meetings, and we felt it was important to do that, to just give them an appreciation of the kind of work in its totality going on, as opposed to just simply the training module.
And then just in terms of our chief has held a number of listening and action sessions with officers and staff, which obviously provide an opportunity for people to talk about how they believe the organisation can become more inclusive whilst identifying outdated practice. We've also got our staff survey, which is opened, and really looking forward to seeing the results there, and some really positive engagement across the force in relation to that. I touched before in relation to the PEDALS, the Positive Action Scheme, so I won't go back over that, and also the work that we're doing with the Police Now scheme, which is really exciting. And again, we've had some fantastic engagement internally in relation to that.
Great, thank you. I had a couple of questions written down, but you've answered them all, so that's helpful. Bissy, do you want to ask your question?
Commissioner, thank you very much. I mean, first of all, I'm quite excited to hear that the next race action plan meeting will be coming to St. Helens. So, that's great, because I'm from St. Helens. First of all, from the title of this particular work stream, that black people and community should be properly represented with an internal culture that promotes inclusivity, I would like some more explanation, basically, about what you're actively doing to promote a more positive culture, based on the fact that there is this level of fear of speaking out, whereby some staff from ethnic minority backgrounds feel that they will be labelled as a troublemaker, if they actually speak out about their lived experiences. So I do appreciate that you said that the chief actually actively listens via these sessions, but I would like to know what you're exactly doing to actively tackle microaggressions. It's really about, I'm just wondering if there is anything that you're actively doing. Obviously, we've heard stories about these WhatsApp groups, and just wondering if there is anything you are doing to actively create a more positive internal culture. Thank you.
Thanks, Bissy. I'll take that, because I think most importantly, the culture needs to come from the top, and I've been very clear in my time as Chief Constable around my focus on inclusion. We have introduced a new leadership framework where it is absolutely clear around the promotion of inclusion, and that we will address exclusion. Within those behaviours that we expect everyone within the organisation to abide by, it is about creating a safe space for people to speak up. When we introduced the leadership strategy, we cascaded that throughout the whole organisation, so from chief officer to through to chief inspectors and police staff equivalents. Everybody had a half-day session together on the leadership strategy and the expectation around the behaviours. That was then cascaded by those command teams throughout the organisation. There was some gaps with it, so we are still repeating that. We have then developed a first-line leaders programme specifically around the leadership framework, so very much that focus on behaviours and demonstrating caring and compassionate leadership within that. We're now and the reason we went with first-line leaders first is because they obviously have the broadest reach across the organisation. I can say what I want as the chief, but trying to cascade that through the organisation to make sure everybody is on message and we are creating that inclusive culture. Our first line leaders need to really understand it, which is why we started with the first line leaders, because they are clearly closest to our frontline staff. We've now rolled that out to second-line leaders. But then we've also listened to the feedback from the first-line leaders that we need to go back to our command teams, which we've done again, and we've done a bespoke session for chief inspectors, inviting people like Abby to Merseyside. So we were one of, I think we were about the third force that's invited Abby Johnson from the ISOB to come and speak to the organisation. The Call It Out campaign, again, which every single member of the organisation was delivered a session on the Call It Out campaign around, if you see those behaviours, challenge it, stop it. If you don't feel confident to deal with it as an individual, then you can use the anonymous ways of reporting it. And we're about to go out for phase 2 of that Call It Out campaign, and that will focus both on internal and external behaviours. And I'm probably, you know, in terms of, there's an awful lot going on, and Jenny will cover some more of that in terms of across all the work streams, but there is a really, really heavy emphasis. The microaggressions that you talk about, that gets covered in the anti-racism training. I did my session on Monday, and that gets covered by in that session around what do we mean by microaggressions, what do we mean by white privilege, what do we mean by anti-racism. All of those things get covered. So I don't think there's one thing that we are doing as an organisation, because I think if they were, we'd have cracked it. There is lots and lots and lots of different things going on across the 4 work streams on the Police Race Action Plan, but then also on our broader focus on inclusion around the MPCC diversity, equality and inclusion work. And I have to say, I, as the Chief, am really well supported by my Chief Officer team, who are all in absolute agreement with this continuing to be a commitment, a priority, a focus, and knowing that we're only just, well, that work has got to carry on, because we're not where we need it to be, and it's going to take a number of years, so it's got to carry on being an area of focus for us.
Okay, thank you very much. Should we do the next slide?
Thank you, Commissioner. So work stream 2, this is a police service that is fair, respectful and equitable in its actions towards black people. So some of the key things that I just wanted to bring out in terms of some of the work that we've done on work stream 2, which we have presented to our stakeholder groups. The learning from Child Q. So there is an action plan in being to address the recommendations from the Children's Commissioner arising out of the Child Q issues, and that's governed through our Police Encounters Group. An initial scan of strip searches concluded that none had taken place in school settings on Merseyside. And of course, just to remind people here, as I've alluded to earlier, our Safer School officers, unlike in other places outside of Merseyside, they're not there in an enforcement role. They're there for engagement purposes. So I think that's really clear for me to talk about here, and important in the context of Child Q. Stop search email receipt. This is an active offer to subjects of a stop search. To date, only 108 requests have been received since 2016, and this offer continues to be raised through training of staff. We heavily involve our Merseyside Independent Advisory Group in terms of audit of stop search, use of force and wider, and really welcome to meet the chair yesterday, the new chair, John Denny, previously, who was the chair of the board at the Anthony Walker Foundation. Stop search, know your rights, a card to give. It's been designed to give to all of those stop search, produced by Merseyside Police, and that's really in wide circulation now. And contained in it is a QR code with a link to a video explaining people's rights, and the QR code links to stop search, know your right. We have discussed with the stakeholder group, and I know the HMIC are coming to see us again in relation to, you know, our work led by John and the team in terms of our low rates of disproportionality for stop search, despite having a high usage of stop search. So that is a positive picture, but we will continue to work on that to ever decrease those disproportionality rates. Our Safer School team also deliver ongoing awareness raising programme for young people regarding knowing their rights in relation to police powers and building that trust and confidence in policing. And we've got that supervisor quality insurance process in place for stop search as well, an expectation of a 50% dip sample, and a real drive ongoing to make sure that we maintain, that all strands maintain standards in relation to this. The Public Scrutiny, Fairness in Policing team, they use body-worn video. They review the body-worn video, and there's a comprehensive QA quality assurance process in relation to that. And then there's supervisor quality insurance through public encounters in terms of stop search as well. And most importantly, in terms of that, making sure that the learning from any of those QA processes is taken forward across the force as well. Rob, is there anything you want to add in relation to Workstream 2?
No, I think it's just worth emphasising the investment that the force has made in terms of having 4 workstream leads to match the workstreams to be found in the national plan, which all 43 forces have signed up to. And that commitment varies in different forces. In addition to that, we have a programme manager, and we report into the inclusion board that's been previously described. So it really is a programme that's kind of connected to the kind of workings and machinery of the force in order to make the change described. Thanks.
Great. Jeannie?
Yeah, just a really quick question. It's great to see the scrutiny of the body-worn cameras, and I know you've explained previously in other panels how that works in terms of how they're assigned. But just very quickly, are we or can we consider using scrutinising of custody footage?
Yes. We do to a degree, and we can. And Nick might add some detail to that as need to be. Nick leads for us as our custody superintendent. We do scrutinise it within the monthly learning panels within criminal justice. The independent custody visitors will have access to that, and we're looking at that monthly custody scrutiny process as well now. So it's a simple answer, yes, we do, but we recognise there's more we can do to keep people safe and to ensure the fair treatment of people who are detained in our custody. We're committed to doing that, and we're committed to that level of public scrutiny to help us to achieve that. Nick, I don't think there's anything else you want to add on that? Okay, thank you.
Great, okay. Next one.
So moving on then to Workstream 3, which is involved, a police service that routinely involves black people in its governance. So the force is working with Leaders Unlocked, an organisation that enables young people and underrepresented groups to have a stronger voice on the issues affecting their lives, to include the existing Youth Independent Advisory Group and Youth Commission. And the Youth Commission on Police and Crime provides a platform, or will provide a platform, for young people to influence the future of policing and crime prevention in their local areas. So Leaders Unlocked have begun their stakeholder mapping exercise and are in the process of contacting schools, colleges, youth organisations, charities and local authorities to market the project and recruit members. MIAG, Merseyside Independent Advisory Group, we're assigning MIAG members to specific workstream leads, which I think is really important, and this will be communicated at the next stakeholder meeting. The Black History Month School Project. So the competition has been organised jointly by Merseyside Police and partners spanning the 5 boroughs of Merseyside, St Helens, Wirral, Sefton, Liverpool and Knowsley, and it's supported by the Anthony Walker Foundation and the International Slavery Museum in Liverpool. And primary school pupils from across Merseyside are invited to design a poster to celebrate Black history, and winning schools have been selected across the 5 boroughs and are in the process of having the artwork designed by a livery company that does police vehicles, and there's massive engagement in relation to that. Hate Makes Me Feel. This is a project running with the Community Engagement Unit and PBAM, and they've conducted a mapping exercise and reviewed evidence-based policing, which helped identify hotspot areas through hate crimes and hate incidents, especially within periods of school holidays. And through an evidence-based research, it was identified that a preventative project targeting Key Stage 2 pupils, as they're at the crucial stage in development before progressing to high school, and they're open to exploring and accepting the message and values that we aim to promote. And by working with Key Stage 2 students, we will see a decrease, I think, in criminality and ASB within adolescents at Key Stage 3 and 4. So this is across Liverpool, and some of the schools that we've got, primary schools, are really engaged with that work. The basketball activity, again, this is feedback from stakeholders, the stakeholder group, around where we need to really put our investment to get maximum trust and confidence and engagement back. So we had the police basketball high school tournament, year 7 to 11, in terms of we've successfully managed to complete year 7 and year 8 at Greenbank. Year 9 and year 10 has been postponed to the beginning of September, so that's starting now. And then the year 11 awards ceremony takes place in Bluecoat the beginning of September. And we're just awaiting the confirmation of the full game against the police officers, which will be interesting. And we had summer activities throughout Shavas Park in August, and we had the 4 days pop-up basketball tournaments, and again collective response from organised basketball working group meeting, which meets every 3 weeks. Leaders Unlocked, I've touched on in relation to that, the public scrutiny panels, and the support there through the police support volunteers has been significant there. And we've done the community engagement officers have developed a Key Stage 2 preventative pilot around Hate Makes Me Feel. And that, I just go back and touch on that in relation to the partnership with Powerful Beyond All Measures, which is a non-profit organisation which aims to improve confidence for victims and raise awareness of the support available in the north of Liverpool. I'm really proud of that relationship between Merseyside Police and Powerful Beyond All Measures. Rob, anything you want to add in relation to Workstream 3?
Just that we initially developed a stakeholder group for use on this programme, but we've now found that members of that group are interested in our official mechanisms of scrutiny around legitimacy panels, etc. So we're talking about the granularity of the programme and how these initiatives are data-led. We've often used the phrase in this meeting, Black community, but obviously we look to disaggregate that in terms of Black African, Black Caribbean, and it was through that work that the basketball was uncovered as being of interest to the Black Caribbean community. And then finally, just to respond to some of your previous points, we encompass lived experience in the programme through kind of development attachments for staff members who are in our staff network, so that we make sure that that's bolted in.
Good stuff. Missy, do you have a question?
Yes, Commissioner, thank you. In terms of engagement with our community, I would like some information on the actual criteria that you use to choose the organizations that you work with. I know that there's been lots of mention about Anthony Walker Foundation, but are there other organizations that you work with? Because in terms of Black History Month for schools, I've always been of the opinion that we need more than a month to actually create this awareness. Please, thank you.
So in terms of how we choose people, where we're engaged, we are engaged in so many different projects. So maybe if I just give you a flavour of some of the projects that we are engaged with and how we choose some of those. So obviously we work very closely with our community engagement unit and with partners and with communities. And through that engagement, through that consultation, those projects are then developed that benefit the local community and raise awareness of issues. So it could be in relation to hate crime, education around road safety, stop search, or it could be in specific areas or force-wide. There's a project running at the moment in the Wirral with the Community Engagement Unit on the back of a piece of evidence-based research that was conducted. And that project in Wirral is looking at the many different challenges that young people face, such as antisocial behaviour, hate crime, race and disability, poor health, well-being due to a lack of physical activity and social inclusion. So partners there that we've engaged with, Cycling UK, Merseyside Community Training, the Quirkley Cafe and Energise Cycles. I've touched on a little bit around the work that the Community Engagement Unit are doing with Powerful Beyond All Measure, and that's where we've done that mapping exercise across Liverpool. And through evidence-based research, it was identified that a preventative project targeting the Key Stage 2 pupils was relevant there. We've identified with the Community Engagement Unit that young people don't always engage with the police, particularly from our need to reach communities. So we've identified that sport opportunity, which we talked about. And again, how do we identify that? By listening to our communities, by listening to the feedback that came back through the stakeholder group and wider. And as a result of that, we've collaborated with the likes of the bronze Olympic medalist, the international basketball player, Paralympics GB, Abdi Jama, realising that the infrastructure for basketball was below the national standard. And I think that scheme really has provided a real opportunity to build enduring and effective engagement with young people across Merseyside.
Great, thank you. Okay, next work stream.
So moving on then to work stream 4, which is not underprotected against victimisation, a police service that protects black people from crime and seeks justice for black people. We're consolidating our governance process of hate crime investigations via our internal Quality in Crime performance meeting. And that's been reviewed for suitability as for a formal policy or process for the new Force Hate Crime Action Plan. We're liaising with our local cyber team locally and regionally to understand how we deliver prevention and protection of people being victims of abuse online, to include benchmarking of how we can improve and deliver a bespoke service for black victims. Support after hate. Thank you for the support, the Commissioner, you've put to that. That's a PCC-funded pilot to address the after-effects of hate crime for victims, and a really important piece of work. And that scheme includes free counselling, therapy, mindfulness, yoga, and gym and group discussion. And then the Activate scheme, which is to review support after being a victim of hate crime. Psychological trauma, race identity and fractured understanding. We're developing the anti-racist counselling through Compass, scoping the needs of our community, putting that specific therapy in to address the needs that have been identified. And we're aiming for that cross-cultural service and cater for representation. And Merseyside Police are supporting the survey and are seeking the help of the DEI group. And we're also doing a lot of work with our occupational health unit, so particularly recognising the trauma where internally our officers and staff are subjected to hate crime from members of the public, and making sure that we take a preventative approach, we engage early and put the right psychological support in for those officers who are often subject to those incidents on a repeated basis, and we recognise the impact, the damaging impact that can have, and obviously take it extremely seriously here within Merseyside Police. Rob, anything you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Mum. It's just to pass on our thanks to the PCC office. Mike Berry's been quite instrumental in our hate crime walkabouts. We've also attended sessions with Refugee Women Connect. We've done a hate crime project called Hate Makes Me Feel, which has been delivered in partnership with several primary schools across the Muslim community. And also hate crime meetings that we've held at the PAL Centre. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Bissy.
Commissioner, This particular work stream is one that I'm actually very passionate about because I know that some members of our community feel underprotected. And I would like to draw your attention to the Tuxedo riot that happened in 1981. I would like to know what your team, has been doing to actively regain the trust of the black community, not just in Liverpool, but in the whole of the Merseyside. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Councillor. So the Toxteth uprisings, as it's phrased, features in the training product from the Anthony Walker Foundation, and there is open conversation with staff around that, concentrating on the positive differences that have come about since then, such as our community engagement unit and approach to stop search.
Okay. Any other questions? Are you happy here? Yeah, okay. So then I think we've got one more slide if we on this.
Yes, so this is a slide in relation to the force-wide mandatory anti-racism training, which I touched on before. Excellent engagement across the force. It started with a session with our senior leaders. John Denny, who was the then chair, led that session with the associates. So just making sure that the leadership of the force was aligned to the why and really understood the context of racism and in Merseyside context, which we felt was very, very important. And then, obviously, I've talked about the numbers that we've got through the programme and also, the real positive feedback that we have had from officers and staff who have attended that training. There's a quote there on the slide, the link to Merseyside Police is super useful, and I and others will know there's barriers there, but laying it out and linking it in that way really helps put everything into perspective. The training was well paced, informative and delivered in a faultless way, extremely beneficial and eye-opening, and definitely took things away from it. And certainly what we're hearing is those sessions are opening up conversation, opening up understanding. We regularly get people saying, I just didn't know that was the context within Merseyside. So I think it's really important that we do understand the history and that we learn from history and understand some of the trauma that's come as a result in communities, because that creates understanding and conversation moving forwards to improve things moving forwards.
I really welcome that, and that's obviously why I think we were keen to put this training in place, and I think that kind of feedback is really welcome, because it is very much meant to be, as you say, a conversation starter and just helping to support officers and staff about having some of those difficult conversations and understanding different experiences. So I'm really pleased to see that officers and staff are really taking to it. So I suppose you've said how many already, so I suppose the last question really on this session, I suppose, is for Chief, really, in terms of, are you kind of satisfied that you're making the progress that you want to in this space, recognising what the priority is in terms of building that trust and confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I suppose at the start, when the question came around the culture, absolutely that commitment, and I think that investment in terms of resource is really important into this area of business. Obviously, Rob is leading this work as part of Jenny's team, and then having the programme manager. Without that investment, without those key programme leads, and without a really detailed plan, we wouldn't be making the progress that we have and that we need to do, and it needs to become embedded within the organisation and needs to remain as a focus. But yes, I am satisfied. And I think we see that from the feedback that we get nationally in terms of Merseyside being an icebreaker force for a number of pieces of work around the National Police Race Action Plan. I think our relationship and engagement with the National Black Police Officers Association, our connection with the ISOB now, we've significantly moved Merseyside on in terms of our focus, I think, on this area in a positive way.
Brilliant. Okay, good. Thank you for that. A useful update. Okay, right, we're moving on now then to neurodiversity. And again, this is another issue that has been, I think, becoming more and more prevalent within the public consciousness, and we're seeing the impact of it in relation to crime and social behaviour. So we were keen to get an update, and we know there's a lot going on. So am I going straight to you, Nick, or yeah?
Thank you, Commissioner. As stated, neurodiversity is becoming more of a prevalent issue. The figures there show that approximately 10-11% of our detainees each month identify as having a range of neurodiverse conditions. We certainly see a greater identification of neurodiversity within the community itself amongst our student officers, which I will touch upon later. And there's a greater awareness of neurodiversity and its impact, certainly on detention of people. What I would say is police custody and detention, safety is paramount, then legality, then dignity. Neurodiversity is often interlinked with both the safety and the dignity aspects, which are key for us. When people are arrested, one of the first questions as part of their risk assessment is, do they identify as being neurodiverse in terms of autism, ADHD, etc.? We ensure that all detainees are seen, certainly by healthcare professionals and where necessary our liaison and diversion staff, as part of their risk assessment, even if they don't identify as having any other medical needs. This is a vulnerability assessment. But at present, we arrest approximately 2,500 people a month come into police custody, and that number has been increasing off late. But as stated, significantly, it's that safety and dignity of detention is where our key focus remain. Go to the next slide, please. Many people coming into custody do suffer from significant health problems, be it drug addiction, mental health problems, socioeconomic background causing other health problems within them, for example, lung problems, but also we are seeing this in extra effect caused by the neurodiversity issues. We provide a lot of wraparound care. We have a joint funded health service provision within custody with nurses in custody suites 24/7, plus we also have our liaison and diversion staff as well, looking at addressing the needs and criminality and looking at diversionary responses for detainees in custody. What has become apparent is how we cater for those with neurodiverse needs. One thing we are looking at now doing is what equipment, what items we can do in support of people with neurodiversity and what we've now called detention engagement methods, which we can actively deploy to give to people in custody to help them and concentrate back to that safety and dignity aspect of detention. Okay, can we have the next slide? Just moving through. So what are they? The traditional one is books, but previously, having been a former custody officer, our books were rather bland in choice. We've greatly increased the diversity and range of our books, appealing to all different age ranges. We now offer adult colouring books. Again, it's considered as therapeutic. It's a way of diverting somebody's attention. Pencils, pens and crayons. Traditionally, we would be trying to remove all such items apart from essential writing material because of potential risks. We're now looking at edible crayons. We're exploring now, certainly as part of the new suites, chalkboards, bits of chalk wall, just to give those people, especially from neurodiverse backgrounds, something else to engage their attention. And then we're looking at Sudoku crossword puzzles. Average detention time is 11 hours in custody. If you suffer from, or you're identified as being autistic or you have ADHD, that 11 hours in a cell is traumatic. With simple deployment of equipment such as this, we can improve that dignity and also improve that level of safety. Could we have the next slide, please? So as I said, we're looking at chalkboards, edible chalk, those distraction techniques, fidget spinners we already give out now as well, and also foam footballs and tennis balls. This is where we have seen the greatest impact. I've seen it myself with people in custody who actively seek out and want to use a foam football, even in the detention areas, in the exercise areas. They'll go and kick the football around. They'll kick the football around in their cell. But again, it reduces that level of risk, both to themselves and also to other people. So, sorry, can we do the next slide? We initially trialled this at Copy Lane, and now from December last year, we've rolled this out across all of our custody suites. The independent custody visitors have been briefed on this, and they're fully in support of this new initiative of ours. What I would stress is other forces have been doing this. We've simply adopted and have improved on what the other forces are doing, but we're already reaping the benefits of it. Okay, thank you. The costs are minimal, as can be seen there, but the benefit far, far outweighs the cost, as we're now seeing. There was some initial scepticism amongst our custody officers, custody staff saying this will never work or it will increase level of risk. For example, with a fidget spinner, there is that potential, but we're happy with the risk assessment involved and, again, the benefits. Okay. And we have the next slide, please. We're seeing real qualitative improvements in the use of these items. It's reduced the need for constant observations. It's reduced the need for hospital transport, extended custody times, less use of the buzzer. If somebody's there with a colouring book, they're less likely to be asking every half an hour, when am I getting out? Trying to attract the attention of the staff as well. This is simple dignity, it's simple qualitative measures. This is not us going soft and giving people fidget spinners and balls for the sake of it. I'm happy to defend that in any scenario. So, for example, this one here, we obviously try not to bring in juveniles into custody, especially people with neurodiverse needs. So this was a shocking incident in itself, and we did review why this person was in custody. However, there was a clear need for them to be brought into custody. Somebody with autism having an autistic crisis episode can be extremely violent, and there was a lot of restraint involved, a lot of confrontation involved. We found by simple usage of these attention deficit, these engagement methods, we were able to take down that level of risk. And then you see that person effectively throwing a phone football backwards and forwards with the officer who's guarding them. So instead of it being a high-risk confrontational episode, I won't say the word enjoyable, being in police custody is not enjoyable, but that level of dignity was improved, that level of safety was improved, and the risk came substantially down. So from my perspective, they came out of custody, and the next time they go into custody, all those negative connotations, should they ever have to go into custody, were removed. So we've done a lot of training for staff in custody around neurodiversity, and that training is continuing. We've had the recent work by another charity, by the Brain charity called Another Sign. We're now looking at doing more and more work for people with brain injuries and acquired brain injuries. There will be new training projects coming out for our custody staff. We train our custody staff. We have bespoke continuing professional development days, and these training products will be given to them around dealing with people with acquired brain injury as well, which we know in itself is another form of hidden disability, and it can manifest itself in disorderly behaviour, public order incidents and the like. And then finally, we're looking at our own support for staff with neurodiverse needs. As I said, we have a lot of new student officers coming forward. My wife's a teacher in secondary school. Identification of people with neurodiversity is much more prevalent in society. We're seeing this similarly within our own staff. We are training our own staff in how to identify neurodiversity, and we can do formal screening if required for new officers coming into the workplace and also for existing officers in the workplace. If necessary, we can get this formal diagnosis arranged as well, certainly for the student officers who are engaging at John Moores University. But it's that wider identification of neurodiverse needs. I would also add there's people who've been in the organisation many years who are now coming forward seeking that level of assessment, who perhaps if they've been at school now would have been identified as being neurodiverse. Can I ask any? That's the end of the presentation in both neurodiversity and also for custody and for our staff.
Great. No, thank you very much for that. I have to say I find the subject very interesting, and the idea that a fidget spinner or edible chalk could actually have such a huge positive impact. And obviously if it reduces time, it reduces stress, it reduces all sorts of things, it's a really positive thing to look at, and quite a simple solution. So it's really good to see that we're putting work into that. Jeannie, do you have questions?
Thank you so much. It's a fascinating presentation, and I think, as the Commissioner said, it really illustrates just how impactful very small changes can be, and especially around dignity in custody, as you mentioned. It's good to see that you're taking forward some of the recommendations from Brain Charity's report. One of the recommendations in that report was around a universal screening tool. So I know at the moment you're asking around self-identification, so when people come in you're asking the questions. Are you looking at having a screening tool in custody so that people who are not diagnosed or may not self-identify are offered the opportunity to have a brief screening?
This will be delivered through the liaison and diversion staff and the healthcare professionals who have a better clinical background, but that's part of the work. They already do a detailed level of vulnerability screening, even with people who don't identify as being vulnerable.
Thank you. That's fantastic, because I think there's, I know in other areas there's been quite big stories and news flash stories about screening for certain neurodiverse conditions, but given that there are over 600 neurological conditions, having one screening tool that will cover all 600 is really difficult, and anyone who's read that report would see that that was identified as a major barrier. So I think doing it through the vulnerability assessment seems to be a really sensible way of approaching that. So it's great to hear that that is what happens. Can I just ask you to explain what the Student Officer AP11 process is? Because I haven't got a clue, and it sounds fascinating.
Sorry, just get to the slide there. Yes, ma'am.
So the students are sent an assessment of learning needs to complete and return during the onboarding process. So when that AP11 assessment is returned, then the initial training sergeants use the information to ensure that any reasonable adjustments are ready for the student starting. And this information is also passed on to Liverpool John Moores University. And the student officer will also have completed a similar form from Liverpool John Moores University as well. So they'll declare any specific learning difficulties. The other bit of work that we are progressing now in line with the national lead for MPCC neurodiversity is how do we identify neurodiversity for our new recruits or any new people coming into the organisation, and how do we make sure that they're not disadvantaged when it comes to the national standards within the occupational health unit, recognising that if they've already had a diagnosis, that it might take longer within the occupational health unit. So identifying them early, identifying what requirements will be needed, so that making sure that in terms of the length of time to get through the process, it's not going to be longer than for other candidates. So really thinking with the national lead about how do we embed considerations around neurodiversity and embrace neurodiversity, because actually it's a really wide talent pool that we should be tapping into.
And then just my final question on this. I absolutely agree with you in terms of that talent pool and you know, generating that support for staff. And, you know, I've seen that in action in, I know like GCHQ do a lot around that, counter-terrorism police do a lot around that, because it is identified that there are, you know, real benefits to it. But I suppose just coming back to the reasonable adjustments, how easy is that for the force to accommodate? And the reason that I'm asking that is that I know, as somebody who's neurodiverse and has reasonable adjustments, that sometimes it's really hard to get tech to talk to each other and get systems to work to each other. And obviously your systems are much more complex than you would find in a standard workplace. So how are you kind of tackling that barrier to make sure that current employees and student officers are getting the support that they need?
So we've got the student welfare officer within the academy. So in terms of early needs, working with Liverpool John Moores University, we've got an agreement with Liverpool John Moores University, and as part of the contract there, in terms of the access for learning needs, etc., that is picked up as part of that two-way process, and we've got a really good relationship with Liverpool John Moores University. For people who are already in the organisation, we have our wellbeing engagement inclusion lead, Gemma Schoen, and she is leading a piece of work at the moment where we are looking to train a cohort of people in the force to pick up exactly what you've just talked about, to make sure that where we've got neurodiverse individuals within the force who believe that they may be neurodiverse, that we support them with the assessment process and also the equipment that is needed. So it isn't fully stood up yet. The training, the Chief Officer signed off that will go ahead, and Gemma Schoen is leading that work, and obviously very clearly linked in with the network as well, to make sure that we continue to progress that. We showcase lived experience within the organisation, and we also have those inputs through the inclusion board as well. So one of the first inclusion boards I chaired, we had someone with neurodiverse lived experience who spoke to the board, which then has influenced some of the policy decisions that we've taken moving forwards.
Okay, thank you. And then Vicky.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. As a mom to a very tall autistic son, I must say that most of the language that has been used in this report, you know, they are sort of familiar, if you understand what I mean. But as you would imagine, I do worry sometimes about the future, you know, for my son who has autism, because sometimes, obviously, when there's overstimulation, they might behave erratic and not want to listen. Somebody who isn't aware of their condition might assume that they are drunk. So this particular slide on how to restrain a vulnerable person, I know that there's been words used about this person being extremely violent and aggressive. I'm quite concerned about the use of handcuffs as well on somebody who is already really vulnerable. And I do appreciate that officers have to protect themselves. But can you please explain what the approved mental health professional AHMP does to de-escalate the situation, in particular the safety of the person who is neurodiverse in custody? Thank you.
De-escalation, be it for any reason, is the key goal of any custody environment. So we appreciate that sometimes the circumstances of arrest are very traumatic. Somebody is being brought into custody, we see it time and again. So the role of the custody staff and their specific training is around de-escalating and doing what can be done to de-escalate. Very often people coming into custody, they can be drunk, they can be under the influence of drugs, or they could be having a mental health episode. But where possible, yes, we have to balance that risk to staff, the risk to themselves. For example, a detainee striking their own head against a wall requires immediate physical intervention, regardless of the cause. So sometimes handcuffs, sometimes leg restraints are necessary, and we do recognise that. That's why we do review our use of force. But our staff are trained specifically in custody around that de-escalation, what can be done to prevent that level of harm. But we also do sadly recognise that sometimes physical restraint is required. Distressing as it is, even if the person is there suffering from a mental health episode and it's not their own deliberate attempt to injure people around them, we have to protect our own staff and we also have to protect themselves.
I think Nick's covered the point I was going to make. We have to recognise the needs of the person that's being detained, but ultimately as well that duty of care to the staff in terms of their own personal safety. So I think the training is the absolutely critical point around that. And it is also covered in personal safety training as well, in terms of that de-escalation. I suppose in terms of our greatest gift being our verbal communication and how you can explain and de-escalate that. And we, just over the past couple of weeks, we've seen it where cases of ABD, in terms of when people are in that delirium state, are being identified by the staff very quickly and recognising that that's a medical episode as opposed to a mental health episode. So it is covered for our frontline operational staff as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. A useful update. Okay, if we move on now on to finance. Keith, you're going to talk us through this?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So if we just turn to the first slide, which shows the financial year-to-date position for the income and expenditure budgets, and we're showing overall a £400,000 underspend, which that includes £200,000 for the North West ROCU as well. So leaving £200,000 for the force position.
So I suppose the only thing to mention on this is that obviously it's still early in the financial year, but I think in previous years we've had a more significant underspend. So I suppose it's looking a bit closer to the line than potentially we would like. Are you kind of monitoring that and any particular concerns at this point?
Yeah, so we continue to monitor it. It's expected that the underspend would come down. We were, as you're aware from previous years, we had the Operation Uplift funding, which came in slightly front-ended. So what we were able to do then is put that to one side into reserves rather than just sort of allocate it out. So we've now allocated the majority of that budget out, but the spending is coming through because we're almost fully established. And therefore it's right that it does come down to that sort of level. It's still an underspend, but we are monitoring it and we'll continue to monitor that during the year, that it doesn't go into a position that goes into an overspend.
And in terms of the impact of the pay award that we mentioned earlier, obviously officers, I think it's now been confirmed for staff as well. Do we know what impact that has on the wider budget?
What we're looking for at the moment is that the funding for this particular financial year will be fully covered. So we expect that to be the case, along with the amount that we've put in as well as the force and you supported Commissioner as well. So we assume 2.5%. We got the award was 7%. That gap has been made up by the government from the grant that we've been provided for. As you're aware, the settlement comes in between September to August, so it cuts across 2 financial years. And therefore, we've been guaranteed the amount for this financial year. What we're less certain on is the amount for next year's element of that one. So that's what that's what we're watching out for.
Okay, great. John, do you want to add anything? You all right with that?
The only other question, Keith, in terms of force overtime, obviously overspent at the end of this quarter. Do you see that what are the reasons for that? And also, is that going to be an issue the rest of the year?
Well, it's fairly typical of the sort of levels we would normally experience. And if you consider that it really is a key enabler for policing, without it, we wouldn't have been able to meet the flexibility and operational demands and response times that the public would expect. If you consider then we've had to, we continue to support the violence reduction and other targeted operations. These are, seen as essential from the Home Office, particularly in an area like Merseyside, so they've given us the funds for that. Because it's not recurrent, it's not ongoing funding, we can't go out and employ permanent police officers and staff on that basis. So what we have to do is use overtime. That's the key part. We don't have a team of ex-police officers who are just sat there waiting to be sort of as reservists almost to come in. So we absolutely have to use our current workforce in order to backfill those demands. So therefore, it is a key enabler. You've also considered some of the large public events that have gone on. Eurovision alone this year, the golf, and then consider other historic ones that have gone on as well. There's lots of work that we have to do, that we have to call on and ask for the overtime to be performed from our existing staff base, the employee base. So it is necessary to have that. However, in all that said, we recognise we're going into a period of increased financial pressures, and we have a 15 million savings challenge over 5 years to achieve. So it's absolutely right that we look at everything, and this is particularly one area where there is a variability to it, and we can continue to focus on that, and that's what we will be doing as part of our savings challenge. We will be looking to make sure that every pound spent on overtime is absolutely necessary and has been approved and gone through the proper processes. We do that anyway, but it's absolutely right that we continue to put focus on that.
Okay, thank you. Next slide.
So this represents our capital plan for 23-24. The actual rephased budget is 25.3 million. So far, year to date, we spent 3.5 million. We will start to see a significant chunk going into the estate strategy, because as we've now completed St Anne Street, one of our largest builds over the next, largest refurbishments over the last few years, the spend will come out for that. And then we've also, as you can see, we've got a significant amount in our vehicle replacement programme. We're now finding that vehicles are starting to come through after the COVID sort of issues and delays. And anyone buying a car at the moment know there's certain supply issues and things. That's also experienced through our fleet area. But we're putting significant investment into the fleet programme, because we know we need to, significantly update the fleet and increase the numbers through uplift as well.
Okay.
Thank you. So then just touching, this is just an outline of our overall approach to savings and efficiency programme. We're very keen that we make sure that there's a structured approach to it. The programme is led by the Deputy Chief Constable and supported from the Chief Officer team, and then the Corporate Support Development Department, and also areas across finance, people services, other enabling functions as well, to make sure that we provide the correct levels of support and intelligence into that area. There's also, it's important that we get the message across to our internal stakeholders and also our external stakeholders to realise the challenge we've got, and the fact that we want everyone to come up with ideas as to how we tackle this savings challenge. And if we just turn to the next slide, this outlines a little bit more about the work that's been progressed so far under that. We have a structured approach. We have a project scoring matrix, so we also consider the impact on the force and the wider public as well on any savings that we come up with. There is a particular challenge within policing, and in so much of the fact that we can't reduce police officer numbers. And as we said earlier on, if we do, there's a significant financial penalty with that. And actually, it's not what the public would want anyway. So they're ring fenced. If you then, so that takes up, that reduces our ability to look at other areas down to about 44%, roughly. So more than half the budget we can't touch. And then if you then consider that over half our police staff workforce are employed in frontline or frontline support areas, that's another area we've got to be really careful about how we impact on that, because that could then pull police officers into doing roles that we don't really want them to be focused on. So it does reduce our ability to probably down to about a third of the budget, really. That said, that's still a sizable amount, and that's what we're focusing on achieving. So you can see the work streams, if you just go back to that, if just a couple forward, yeah. So they outline our main sort of actions, our programmes of work, and I'm extremely impressed through the work that we've done within the force to make sure it is integrated, it's really carefully considered. The communications, I think, are spot on, and we're looking at every aspect at all possible to do that. We see sustainability as being a key part. We think that's an enabler, not necessarily a cost issue. And so some of the areas we'll be looking at is to maximise on that, because we think we'll get a good return on that, and I think it's what the public would want us to be, as sustainable as we can be.
Good. Okay. Thank you. And obviously, this is something that we'll continue to monitor as we go forward through the financial year as well. Any questions from anyone? Anyone else? John? No? I'm happy. Okay. Thank you, Keith, for that. Right. Okay. Last bit of the agenda then now. We come to the public questions. So as colleagues will be aware, we invite the public to submit any questions they want me to put to the Chief and her team. So we've had a few questions come through. So the first one is around, particularly about the Wirral. We get a lot of engagement from the Wirral. I think we must have a lot of people watching this online, hopefully. So questions particularly around some of the work that's being done around tackling drug dealing and social behaviour of young people, specifically in the south end of Wirral, but also that activity around the Knocktorn, Beechwood and Woodchurch estates, where obviously I know there's been a high level of activity following on from the incidents last year. So I don't know if there's any updates colleagues can give on that. John? Thanks,
Commissioner. Yeah, I mean, you quite rightly call out the activity that started off post-Christmas of last year after the tragic murder of Ellie Edwards, which has continued to tackle organised criminality, drug dealing and antisocial behaviour, particularly around the estates that are mentioned. And I think the question mentions Knocktorn, Beechwood and Woodchurch estates. That's now under the banner of Operation Evolve, which is our approach to clear, hold and build. A lot of the clear work, driving out organised criminality, no complacency involved in this. Then moving on to preventing the return of that in sort of measures and working through partnerships to build community resilience and the strength of communities through investment, funding and community sort of social capital building activity, priority and participatory budgeting, for example. So what we do know in that area, and the work continues. We've made over 400 arrests in the area since the start of this year, which is significant. We have 4 live public safety protection, public space protection orders in place across that sort of side of the east part of the Wirral, tackling antisocial behaviour in the lower end of activity. We have dedicated teams in place in addition to our neighbourhood teams to focus on that. Obviously, I'm not going to go into the detail of some of that operational activity, you wouldn't expect me to. But there is an ongoing commitment to maintain a level of resource, to maintain a high level of activity, and our ongoing commitment to Operation Evolve and the clear, hold and build approach, and indeed, very much working in partnership, and it's the local authority that chairs the organisational delivery group, which governs and drives much of that coordinated activity in those particular areas. So a full commitment to the community. We continue that. Inspector Sharon Robinson leading that very much as the neighbourhood inspector for the area, but well supported throughout the local policing area and through the force itself, and indeed reflected in our change to our operating model, so the community first operational review and what we call a command team corridor approach, so bringing the different elements of the force together in a more effective way to deliver a much stronger and better place-based approach to policing, very much evident in the Wirral, and I think we can see that in some of the results that we're seeing. But as I said earlier, no complacency. We continue to commit to the communities in the Wirral and those most impacted, and we will continue to be there working alongside them and with them and for them to tackle the things that make them feel unsafe.
Great, thank you very much for that update. So the second question then, again, was from the Wirral about the Wirral Council implementing 20-mile-an-hour zones across the borough, and there was a concern that speed limits are being ignored by most drivers, so what are Merseyside Police doing to enforce these changes? Jonathan?
Thank you, Commissioner. As you know, Merseyside and the local authorities are all signatories of the Vision Zero plan, project plan, and this is part of that. So speeding is part of the big 4, so seatbelts, use of mobile phones, speeding and drug driving, and it's also got its own separate pillar as well. So we have been working closely with the Wirral to put this in place, and pleased to support that. There is various signage needs to go up, some signage needs to come down. some road painting needs to go on. So at the moment, we're not in a position where it is uniform across the world in all the streets. So that handover will take place in autumn 2023, and then we can start doing that enforcement in line with Vision Zero and those hot streets that we have spoken about previously.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. And then the final public question then was around particularly interested in the visibility of policing, so seeing more police on the beat, police stations, and police knowing the local area and that they're easy to contact. So I suspect this is linked to the kind of C4 work as well that we've touched on. But John?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. We touched on that with the C4, so around that sort of place-based approach, but under Operation Uplift, which I think the Chief and Jenny mentioned earlier on, we've seen an additional 628 officers recruited and put into various strands and departments across the force. Most notably, every single local policing area and every single neighbourhood team will have seen an uplift in the resources to one degree or another across the force, and we've reinstated 2 full neighbourhood teams in Kirkby and the city centre, reflecting, frankly, a need to reinvest in some of those communities. And we continue again to commit to that. We continue to commit to our problem-solving approach, enhancing that. The work we've done around hotspots policing, linked to our public perception surveys to understand the impact on some of our highest risk, highest harm communities, and to working to establish and understand community priorities and then act on them. You said we did, for example. So that's our commitment to the communities of Merseyside in terms of visible policing across all of our facets, but particularly with that focus on local policing. In terms of more police stations back open, well, there's a difference between police stations that are open to the public and have inquiry desks, and we have 10 of those across Merseyside, and police stations that are operational and have operational officers and staff contained within them or deployed within them, and that's a much more extensive number across, linked to our estate strategy, but we continue to try to be as responsive and transparent with communities in terms of access to police buildings and police stations. But of course, our offer in terms of community engagement, listening to communities and understanding their needs is much more broad, much more diverse, and embraces more of a digital approach and a personal approach outside of traditional police stations, as you would expect.
Yes, okay, brilliant, thank you for that. So that is the end of the public questions. That brings us to any of the business, which I've not been notified of any. The only thing I will say, which I was remiss to say at the beginning, is that John, is this your last meeting? Possibly. So for those who don't know, John has been successful in being appointed as Deputy Chief Constable. You have to remind me where? Staffordshire, yes. So obviously our congratulations go to John, although it'll be a big loss to Merseyside, but thank you for your work here, it's much appreciated. So next meeting then is going to be 18th of December, back here again, 1 o'clock, and we'll be looking at violence against women and girls, hate crime and serious and organised crime. Thanks very much.